And that's that intuitive, emotional, quick, you walk into a room and you make a judgment of the room and the people there. And it's not something you think about. It's not something you're conscious of. It's just the way you're wired, right? It's kind of, in a kind of an evolutionary context, it's that fight or flight response.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry association committed to bridging the gap between ESG sustainability and digital transformation. My name is Isabella. I am the co-host of this talk series here with Manuel, another co-host, also the executive director at the AKFI, and our special guest today, John. Thank you for taking the time, John.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to this talk series, we get to connect with great minds to together discuss the current and the future state of ESG sustainability and digital transformation. And John, congratulations for your latest book.
Thank you.
The Intelligence Tsunami. That's right. Already intelligent enough. Yeah, and definitely, without a word, all our audience, please check on the Amazon. It's published last week, right. Newly launched. Yeah, very exciting.
Newly published, yeah.
Yes. And it's already been, and it's already the #1 new release and the best-selling. Congratulations, John. And I already had the privilege snippet some draft chapters, and I'm super excited about all the topics, and we're going to cover part of it today. And about John is known for his diverse contributions and achievements. He co-founded one of the country's largest angel groups, which became a significant force in investing in entrepreneurial companies. Without wasting time, because I'm sure you have tons to share today, let's start our question. How do you define autonomous intelligence, and what do you see as the current state of AI development in achieving these kind of autonomy?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And I think we're just on the cusp of autonomous intelligence. So the kind of systems we've had in the past have been limited to specific functions. I think everybody woke up when ChatGPT 3.5 was released, and it had some pretty amazing functionality. Large language models, as they exist today, you put input in them, they crunch through their neural networks, and they give you a response. And you and I read what they produce, and we see meaning in it. But the neural network itself, it's not conscious, it's not self-aware, it doesn't really know what it wrote. It doesn't know whether that's good or bad. It's just the output of its system. And I think autonomous intelligence, what's coming is the ability of intelligence agents to perceive the environment around it, especially the physical world. I mean, that's what we as humans do. We first experience the world physically, right? And then begin to plan. We take that for granted that, if you're even going to go to the grocery store, you start to think about how you're going to get there. How do you get out of the house? How do you get to the car? How do you get to the parking lot? And so you start to break it into, sequences, and you might even consider alternatives. Do you go down this street or you go down that street? You make a decision, you act on that decision, and then you learn, right? I mean, this is what you expected the output to be. This is what happened. And so next time, maybe you go a different way. So that didn't work out so well. And so that ability to perceive, to plan, to decide, to act, and then to learn is really what, to me, autonomous intelligence is. And that doesn't quite exist yet, but it's coming. I mean, it's right on the cusp, and it's really going to be transformational in organizations and individuals. I think it's going to transform our society in ways we really probably can't anticipate right now.
Excellent definition. And I wanted also to, maybe for our audience, the first time, I definitely suggest you and Isabella write at least a large article about on AI intelligence. As I mentioned before we started the
I
recording.
love that. That'd be great.
Yeah, Isabella published last year, a year and a half ago, actually, a book called The Digital Mind of Tomorrow. And I think the day came to write something about the digital mind of the near future.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So wanted to go a little bit deeper into the discussion about the autonomous intelligence, and of course, uh, the internet it's a buzz, the press it's a buzz about the challenges faced by individuals in undergoing through this transformation. And I know in your book you have a number of case studies on AI-driven transformation. And maybe would you like to share one or two to sort of illustrate and kick off the conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more interesting ones was right as I was getting to the end of writing the book, I went to a business reception in downtown Greenville, and this is actually the first story in the book. And I met a young banker. His name's Nathan, and he's probably 35 or so. And he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, and you could just tell it made him very anxious, which is usually the reception I get, right? People think about AI and they're worried about it. You know, how's it going to impact me? Is it going to take my job? And, I see people much more afraid than I do people see opportunity. Anyway, he was pretty nervous about it. And so we chatted during the evening. And, I made the observation to him that, if your job requires a checklist, it's not long for this world, right? I mean, it's going to be replaced. And he said, well, I do international banking. He said, that's a more sophisticated application. And I thought to myself, well, he somehow thinks if he has a sophisticated checklist, that's a moat that's going to protect him from this, barbarian at the gate. And that's just not true, is it? I mean, it might not be the first thing it takes up, but it'll eventually get there. And then he started talking about, well, there's always going to be a role for relationship bankers. Now, I think that's a little bit better idea, because it's going to be a while before these things have the emotional intelligence that human beings do. But I think increasingly we're starting to rely on technology. I find it interesting sometimes on social media where people talk about the fact that they don't like self-service retail in grocery stores. I love it, right? I just go through, I check out, I go home. I always tell them, I'm glad they don't like it because it makes the line shorter for me. So, I think as we start to rely on technology, somehow we don't have quite the same interface that we had, and so his reliance on the fact that he's, person to person with his clients, I'm not sure that's really going to be enough. But, as I was walking away from him, I said, the good news is that you've been in your industry long enough that you actually have some experience. He's 35, probably been there 10, 12 years. And I said, you got, several decades left in your career, so you have time to take advantage of it. So he looked at me and he said, you're telling me I don't need to be afraid? And my best Yoda-like impression, I said, no, you need to be afraid, very, very afraid. And so, he kind of walked away and kind of shaking his head. And he said, been good to talk to you. I'm headed this way. And I thought to myself, isn't it interesting what his journey is going to be, of the next little bit? I mean, is he going to, is it going to replace his job? Is he going to be able to ride that wave and, create value? He's in an interesting place. And I think all of us are like that, right? I mean, the first industrial revolution really replaced labor, manual labor. But now what it's doing is it's, beginning to, take out knowledge work. And that's even a greater threat to us because that's kind of what makes us human. And it's got us all nervous. And I think there's good reason to be nervous.
I would replace the word nervous with awareness, because awareness leads to action. So being aware of the environment, it's still a unique property of or the highest intelligence level on the natural scale, is the property of humans, right? We can predict, we can create models, not predict the future, but create models about the future. and acted on those models. So awareness, I think, it's a key factor on, if you are afraid, you're paralyzed, at least in the way I feel. If you are aware, now you can spring to action. You can go and learn something different. Also,
I think that's a nice intellectual thought process, but I think a whole lot of people are afraid. At the end of the day, we're emotional creatures, and there's a lot of folks see this coming, and they don't know how it's going to impact them, and it's making them, uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, leave it to Hollywood and the Friday the 13th series to scare us with skeletons from closets. But
so this kind of circles back to the whole question of autonomous intelligence. And so, there's a school of thought that says our brains have two levels of intelligence. And the first they call system one, and that's that intuitive, emotional, quick. You walk into a room and you make a judgment of the room and the people there, and it's not something you think about. It's not something you're conscious of. It's just the way you're wired, right? It's kind of in a kind of an evolutionary context. It's that fight or flight response. And if you didn't have it, you wouldn't survive in the jungle. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere along the way in human evolution, we developed what they call system two learning, which is what you're describing, the ability to be self-aware, to think about the future, to anticipate what's coming, to maybe not respond to that initial, intuitive response you have, emotional response. And so all large language models and most AI systems today are all this system one, right? You put in, and it gives you a result, and it doesn't really do anything to evaluate or judge it. But what's coming, what makes it autonomous, things that can work without human beings, it's its ability to do this system level kind of thought process you're talking about. The ability to plan, to be able to be thoughtful, to act, to learn.
Is it coming?
Excuse me?
Is it coming?
Oh, absolutely, it's coming. There's no question, right? And so in my book, I talk about the development of how. And you may not be old enough to have seen the movie, but, and there was a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey, and they were on a trip to Jupiter, and HAL was the computer that controlled the spaceship. And, the crew started to worry that HAL was malfunctioning. And so they decided they wanted to turn HAL off. And HAL starts saying, no, that's not a really good idea. I just don't think that's a good plan. And, I won't get the punchline for you, but it didn't turn out well for the crew.
You cannot do that. You cannot do that.
No, you can't do that. No, this is just not a really good idea, guys. Anyway, so I'm not concerned about agents going rogue like that. Honestly, I think that's a long way off. I am very concerned about nefarious people using it, right? And there's a lot of people in the world that would do bad things with it if they had control of it. And so that's something we all have to be concerned about. I think one of the best ways to protect ourselves is for, to be open with it, you be transparent with it, let as many people as possible, build on it. That's actually safer than some small group of people controlling this, which would be pretty scary. George Orwell wrote several books about that. And I don't think we want to go that dystopia. So
the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
And the truth is it's inside the AI. It's inside Paul.
Right.
And thank you for the reference to Kahneman, right? The philosopher and the psychologist, right? That actually got a Nobel Prize, I believe, for economics. Interesting, link between economics and the way we think and the Homo economicus.
Right.
And so definitely, I haven't heard before this reference to System 1 and System 2, but we own System 2. You also mentioned about the first industrial revolution and the subsequent industrial revolutions. They resulted actually in better life, in more time, better life conditions, more time for people to enjoy life, not just to enjoy the 9 to 5 office hours. Or I think during the Luddites in the 18th, 19th century, they were working 7 days a week, 10 or 12 hours. They have children working in the factories and so on. So I think there is definitely progress. AI is part of the progress. Progress comes with changes in society, changes in lifestyles. And back to your example, great example, I think people are worried. They should be, they should be aware, they should be worried, and this should lead them to consider alternative uh, careers. Half a century ago, if you work for IBM or one of these large companies, AT&T at the time, you'll have lifetime employment coming from that industry. And I can tell you that most of my colleagues never had lifetime employment, including myself.
Not today, do you? Mm-mm. Well, the scenario you just painted is some people lose and other people win, right? So it may be a net gain for society, but that doesn't mean every individual is going to win. And I don't know if y'all have ever heard of calling somebody a Luddite. And today we use that as a derogatory term that you don't get it, right? I mean, the world's changing and you don't get it and you're resisting it. And one of the chapters in my book is titled "The Luddites Were Right." They were a textile craft worker in the UK in the early 1800s, and the textile mills started becoming automated, and it was destroying their craft textile industry. And so they attacked the mills and just tried to destroy the equipment. And the Parliament actually made that a capital offense to do that. And we use this word Luddite to say you didn't get it. Actually, they did get it. They were exactly right. It did destroy their craft, right?
I guess the action was extreme. And again, you are actually at the center of the textile industry of US. I wonder if you have any more recent story about the changes in that industry.
Yeah, we used to be the textile center of the world. Yeah. And then, globalization happened and it wiped the textile industry. I mean, we traded Silicon Valley for the textile industry in the Southeast. That's what we did. And when I moved to Greenville, South Carolina, 42 years ago, it was a dead textile town. I mean, the stores were closed. Everything had moved out to the mall. I mean, it was really a scary place. And the Renaissance here in, 4 decades has been absolutely fantastic, but it is not a textile capital anymore. I mean, it's been reinvented, in automotive and some other industries, over that time. I was a senior executive at a global company that made electronic capacitors. The name of it was Kemet. And when the internet bubble busted in 2000, it just devastated electronics. And, I got to be the public face of laying off about 10,000 people. I had a TV reporter one time ask me if I was concerned about my job. I said, if you keep showing up, I'm in good shape because there's nobody else here want to talk to you. And, if you were somebody that had a high school education, you were 55 years old and you'd spent your career learning to make electronic capacitors and you got laid off, you were screwed, right? I mean, you're not going back to school to be a nurse. That just isn't going to work. And so, there's a good example where in the big scheme of things, technology may create more jobs than it kills. But for that individual, that person had a problem. And, I think as society, we need to make sure we have some safety because that person had gotten up every day, come to work, did what was expected of them. They did everything that was asked of them and what they got run over by had, it was globalization. It had nothing to do with anything they did. And so, we got to make sure that we have a safety net for people like that. So they just don't because if we don't, then people get anxious and they get frustrated and that gets reflected in our politics. And, it's kind of in our enlightened self-interest to make sure everybody, is has this safety net available to them. And so this AI tsunami, it's going to happen again, right? But this time it's actually going to happen to knowledge workers, not just people, providing manual labor. And like my banker friend, I mean, if you're in a digital industry like banking, you have good reason to be concerned, what that's going to look like 10 years from now. And nobody really knows. I mean, that's the thing about it. I mean, we have a lot of people pontificating, but if they actually knew, they'd be Warren Buffett, right? but there are not many Warren Buffetts of the world. So, that's a part of the book. It's kind of the second half of the book is, okay, how do you deal with that ambiguity, with that uncertainty? how do you manage that change, so that you can be successful?
I think one of the topics, generically speaking, should be taught in school. It's always have a plan B.
And
What if
C and D and E. I mean, a couple, several. Right,
but
right.
definitely start at least with a plan B, because what if everything I'm doing is going to be automated, right?
Well, one of the things that you and I've talked about is the fact that lots of big organizations are operationally excellent, right? They're data driven. They have lots of data about their customers, their operations, their vendors, and the people that run these organizations are, they've been successful in these data driven processes, and they're exceptionally good at it. And that works well until something from the outside hits you, right? And it's kind of outside your data set, and it's unclear, it's ambiguous. And that's what I think this intelligence tsunami is going to do to a lot of organizations. It's just going to hit them from the outside. And the people that are excellent at running the organization as it exists today aren't necessarily the people with the skill set, to navigate the change. And that's
absolutely.
And a lot of organizations are going to get washed away because of that. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, if you go back, part of the book is kind of a history of the last century of electronics, and you see that happening over and over, right? Some organizations a market leader for some period of time, and then the paradigm changes and they get wiped out, and somebody new comes along, and it happens over and over and over. And you start, and what's really, I think we all need to be paying attention to is the people running these organizations are really smart, really successful people. If they were just all idiots, we could write them off, but they're not.
No,
they got washed away, and they're like us. And it's like, oh my gosh, if that could happen to them, it could happen to us.
If nothing else, they have to read the Schumpeter and the creative destruction, right? The
Gale of creative destruction, right? It's just what makes capitalism work.
Exactly, and we're going through these cycles, and one of the things I want to connect with is the introduction of a ethical, much more ethical governance, which is coming with sustainability and ESG. The world is still divided, pro and anti ESG camps. But at the end, the regulatory framework, it's happening. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in California. Recently, the Security and Exchange Commission stepped in, and they all tied to materiality and to reporting on their efforts for sustainability. So there are opportunities for jobs in sustainability. The other day, for instance, from AKFI, we're talking to a couple of people, a couple of executives, and they were saying, "Oh, we'll hire consultants." And I asked them, "So who is going to manage your consultants if you don't have any knowledge in house?" Okay, you can hire extra resources, but if you don't know how to hire, whom to hire, you'll just open your checkbook and hope for the best, right?
Yeah, I know that's a big part of your book, Isabel. The whole ethical part of this. How do you see that playing out?
Well, thank you for pointing it out. My mind is racing as I heard what you say, what you're sharing and all that. I was just thinking about the word tsunami, right? What does it mean? It's to wipe out everything. And the difference is it wiped out, that's first thing. And the second thing is it needs to be rebuilt differently. It's not like you use the same thing, same material. I think that's why I found this technology development, artificial intelligence, it's so fundamental. It just rebuilding the whole society system from education, corporation, work, in every way, because it literally just forces us to function in a new way, in every sense, work and the way we use our technology, the way we educate our kids. They're not going to use the same thing we're teaching them today. That's for sure. So that's what I see. It's so critical to see this thing as a very holistic social perspective. And speaking of the fear, I do see a two group. One is excited about the leverage, the benefit this technology can bring to them, because they can leverage the work a technology does and focusing on the things that human can do much better and what they're good at. And the other group, as you mentioned, they're being trained and developed with a certain job or occupation, and they're afraid because of the replacement and things like that. I do see this very clear distinction between two groups. One is excited and one is fear-based. And about the ethical use, that is a very critical, because everything we're doing right now, we're lost, or we find there's no way to move forward, there's no direction. I think that has a lot to do with the ethical practice. We have no guidance how to develop and how to incorporate this new technology into our existing system. So it's a very, very broad topic that touched on every sense of the society.